Jesus taught his followers, his disciples, to pray to their Father in heaven. Jesus himself prayed to God as his Father. Therefore, Jesus thinks of himself and his disciples as children of God. It's interesting then to think of the examples that Jesus gives of plants growing and producing seed and fruit, alongside this idea of Jesus' followers being the children and family of God. In one sense, a plant is like a parent, and seeds are like children. A follower of Jesus is encouraged to grow fruit and seed, as we discussed earlier. So in some sense, each disciple is called to gather a wee family around them of new followers, helping them to grow seed and fruit themselves. Family is a good word for such a group of followers, because in every human family, we encourage children to grow and learn, both from ourselves as teachers and examples, but also from teachers at schools and colleges, and in church situations as well. In a family, we have a natural love between children and parents, although in some families that is disturbed by the actions of parents or children or others. We usually have a natural care for one another, parents, sisters and brothers, all together. We support and help each other as best as we can. It is such a family that Jesus calls each of us to grow around ourselves, as we help others to follow Jesus and learn to follow him for themselves. Children often learn how to be good parents from their own parents. In families where there is poor parenting, then the children often find it difficult to be good parents themselves, as they have not had a good example as they were growing up. We face a similar problem in the church today. Many of us have not had good examples of how to help people become followers of Jesus, nor how to help them become fruitful themselves. For many of us, we were taken along to church by our parents, and then went to the Sunday school when the Bible readings and sermon for the grown-ups came along. In some places, the Sunday school never came into the church worship service and never experiences the adults in worship and learning together. Perhaps that was because worship services were too grown up for children even to understand what was happening, never mind to be interested. In the current era, many young people have learned hardly anything about Jesus, as they didn't go to Sunday school, and the schools only taught them the very basics about what it means to be a follower of Jesus. Christianity and church has been something that other people do, which many people know very little. The followers of Jesus are having to learn all over again how to grow fruit and seeds, and how to tend young plants so that they themselves produce fruit and seeds. How can we learn to do that? The Apostle Paul, in his letter to the Galatians, is trying to do just that. He had heard news from the new church community there, which he himself had established. They were going back to their old ways, trying to make following Jesus about rules for meals and for special days and celebrations. Instead, Paul was trying to remind them what he had taught them in the first place, that following Jesus was all about listening for his voice by the Holy Spirit, and in faith putting the directions of Jesus into practice in their lives. It wasn't about laws and rules. It was about faith and obedience. That's why Paul speaks about the Spirit of God helping us to call out to God, Abba, Father. The word Abba is an Aramaic word in the everyday language that Jesus spoke, meaning daddy. It's not a formal word. It's an intimate family word that a child who was learning to speak would first use of his dad, his father. Paul explains that God gave them religious rules or laws like the Ten Commandments because they hadn't yet come to know God as their Father. They were like servants or slaves who had to do what they were told without understanding why. But now that they had reached the age of maturity, they knew God as their Father. They were like responsible children who were now able to take charge of their own family under the direction of God's Spirit. Of course, any example or illustration breaks down when you examine it in too much detail. Jesus used another illustration. In John's Gospel, chapter 15, he said, "My Father is like a vineyard owner, a gardener." Jesus is like the main stem of the vine, and each of Jesus' followers is like a branch, and the gardener tends the branches to maximize the amount of fruit, the grapes, that they will grow. Branches are trimmed and side shoots removed so that they put all their energy into making flowers, then fruit, and then seeds. But if the branches try to make fruit on their own, they will shrivel and die. A branch which falls off or is broken off cannot survive. To produce good fruit, each branch needs to have a good connection with the main stem. And together all the branches will produce a good harvest. If one branch tries to take over, then the other branches will be weakened. It is God who is to be in charge through His Spirit, not any one of the branches. That's why Paul was not too anxious about his offshoot churches like the Galatians and the Corinthians. He knew that God was leading them and directing them by His Spirit. But when he heard that they were going astray or they asked him questions, then he wrote back and then let them get on with it. In the church today, indeed for more than 1,000 years, we have become far too dependent on having a single leader in each congregation, perhaps called a minister or priest. Paul appointed leaders in each congregation and then moved on, and the leaders had to work it out for themselves with the guidance of the Holy Spirit, crying, "Abba, Father, help us." Although they did get occasional visits or letters from Paul and the other apostles to help them on their way. They had to remember what they'd been taught, that following Jesus was about faith and not about rules. The Church of Scotland, as well as other Christian denominations, is facing an increasing shortage of ministers and the money with which to pay for their costs. Congregations and kirk sessions need to recover the old ways of helping others to find and follow Jesus. They need to learn how to grow with only God's Spirit to help them, and without the presence of a full-time trained and paid parish minister. Time is short. The time for change is now. We need a good harvest and harvesters to gather it in. Let's ask God to make us fruitful and also to be good harvesters. Amen.